passage is here. Are you certain? The risks are great. I am certain. We must go.
There are talents that grow best where no one is looking. Minds that sharpen in silence. Gifts so dangerous to the powerful that history itself tries to bury them. What you are about to hear sounds like fiction. But every piece of this story comes from fragments that survived fires, wars, and deliberate erasure. Letters that were never meant to be read. Journals hidden behind false walls. Testimonies whispered long after the people involved were dead. By the end of this story, you will not be asking whether it happened. You will be asking why it was hidden from you. This is the story of a boy with no surname. A boy who belonged to no one. And a mind that quietly changed the fate of empires. In the plantation records of Hacienda San Rafael in colonial Peru, he appears as a single line of ink. Mateo. Field hand. Age uncertain. Property acquired 1781. No birthplace. No parents listed. No past worth recording. Mateo was about 9 years old when he was sold at a Lima auction house. He was purchased alongside 3 mules and a shipment of iron tools by Don Hernan Villagran, a minor landowner drowning in debt and desperation. Mateo was small for his age. His hands were already rough and scarred from labor no child should ever know. But what unsettled people was not his body. It was his eyes. They did not wander. They did not stare blankly. They measured, as if he were always calculating distances no one else could see. Hacienda San Rafael sat in a strange valley where 3 rivers met and twisted through dense land. Every rainy season reshaped the terrain. Paths vanished. New ones appeared. Even experienced mule drivers got lost there. Cargo went missing. Messengers disappeared for days. Neighbors joked the valley itself was cursed. Mateo arrived quietly and worked quietly. He hauled water, tended animals, slept on dirt floors with 24 other enslaved people. He spoke little. He listened constantly. Within months, overseers noticed something odd. Mateo never got lost. Not once. Whether sent to a storage shed he had never seen or a distant grazing field he had never visited, he always arrived directly. No hesitation. No wrong turns. At first they called it luck. Then they tested him. One morning, the head overseer Tiago, a hard man from Portugal, decided to confuse the boy on purpose. He gave Mateo a set of directions to a shed on the eastern edge of the property. Go north past the crooked pine. Then east at the stone wall. Then south along the creek. The instructions led in circles. Mateo listened carefully, nodded, walked away barefoot. He returned in half the expected time. He had gone straight to the shed using a narrow path Tiago did not even know existed. When questioned, Mateo answered simply. The sun was there. So east was there. The shed was east. I went east. Tiago laughed but later mentioned it to Don Hernan during their weekly accounting. Don Hernan was desperate. His coffee crops had failed. His silver mine had flooded. Creditors were closing in. Then opportunity arrived wearing a military uniform. General Don Sebastián Álvarez, a Spanish officer stationed in Lima, came to the valley for hunting. He arrived with junior officers, guards, servants, and a military mapmaker named Felipe. Don Hernan spared no expense he could not afford. Fine wine, lavish meals, guided hunts. On the 3rd day, disaster struck. The hunting party ventured into the eastern hills and became hopelessly lost. Felipe had drawn their route carefully. Compass bearings, landmarks, everything correct. Yet by late afternoon, the map led them in a complete circle. The general grew angry. The officers grew nervous. Don Hernan felt his last chance slipping away. Then someone remembered the boy. The slave who never gets lost. Mateo was brought before the mounted officers. Barefoot, silent, dirt still under his nails. Can you lead us home? The general asked, barely looking at him. Mateo studied the sky, the shadows, the slope of the ground, the sound of water. Then he pointed. That way. 2 hours if we do not stop. Felipe scoffed. That is northwest. The hacienda is southeast. But Don Hernan overruled him. Mateo led them home in 90 minutes. He took paths no map showed. He read moss on trees. The flow of streams. The shape of the land itself. The general was impressed. And curious. That night over dinner, He asked questions. Can the boy read? No. Can he do mathematics? I do not know. The general leaned back. I wonder what he could do with proper tools. Curiosity became an experiment. Matteo was taken to the hacienda library where a military map was spread across a table. Rivers, mountains, roads. Tell me what you see. Matteo studied it quietly. Water flows down. These blue lines are rivers. Correct. And these circles, they are hills. Within an hour, Matteo understood maps without ever having seen one before. The general saw potential, and he saw a weapon. Weeks later, Don Hernan agreed to lend Matteo to the military. Temporarily, Matteo was 12 when he was taken to Lima. He never returned. In Lima, Matteo entered a world of maps and secrets. He cleaned inkwells and sorted parchment. But he watched everything. Felipe made a choice he would later regret. He began teaching the boy. Matteo learned faster than anyone had ever seen. Within months, he corrected maps used by the military. His work guided campaigns and supply routes. But his name never appeared. His mind shaped history from a locked room. And that was only the beginning. Because what Matteo would become terrified the very empire that used him. If you want part 2 of this hidden story, make sure to subscribe. Like this video so more people can find it. Share it with someone who loves forgotten history. And comment below. Do you think some minds are too powerful to be allowed freedom? Part 2 is darker, and much more dangerous. Part 2. Some prisons do not have walls. Some chains are invisible, and some horrors are polite, educated, and wear uniforms. By the time Matteo turned 13, he was already shaping wars he would never fight. He worked in a narrow, windowless back room deep inside the military complex in Lima. The air smelled of ink and damp parchment. Candle smoke stained the ceiling. Around him were maps of jungles, rivers, mountains, and coastlines he would never see with his own eyes. Every day, officers argued over troop movements using his calculations. Every week, supply routes succeeded or failed based on his quiet corrections. Entire campaigns shifted because of numbers he wrote in the margins. And yet, he remained invisible. There were rules. Strict rules. Unbreakable rules. Matteo could study maps only under supervision. He could draw on practice parchment. He could discuss theory with Felipe in private. But he could never keep a map overnight. Never carry one outside the room. And most strangely of all, never touch a compass. That order came directly from General Don Sebastián Álvarez. A compass grants autonomy, the general explained calmly. A slave who understands maps and holds a compass could go anywhere. We may use his mind, but we must never give him direction. So Matteo learned navigation without the most basic tool of navigation. He memorized magnetic declination tables. Calculated bearings in his head. Oriented maps using the sun, shadows, time, and mathematics. Denied the instrument, he became better than those who relied on it. By 1789, Matteo was 17. Within military circles, the reputation of Felipe Cortés had grown legendary. His maps were praised as precise, reliable, almost prophetic. Roads appeared exactly where the maps predicted. Rivers behaved as expected. Outposts survived where others had failed. Felipe knew the truth. The viceroyalty of Peru was struggling. Indigenous resistance intensified in remote regions. Supply lines collapsed. Expeditions vanished into unmapped terrain. Inaccurate geography was costing lives and money. Then came the commission that would change everything. A new Spanish military outpost was to be established in the Amazonian foothills. The region was considered nearly unmappable. Rivers twisted endlessly. Dense forest erased landmarks. Past expeditions failed not to enemies but to confusion. Men starved. Men drowned. Men simply disappeared. The commission came directly from the viceroy. Success meant promotion and prestige. Failure meant disgrace. General Alvarez summoned his cartography team and gave them 6 weeks. Felipe went to Matteo. Can it be done? He asked quietly. Matteo studied the existing materials. Missionary journals written in fear. Traitor sketches drawn from memory. Indigenous testimonies distorted by translation and coercion. Contradictions everywhere. After hours of silence, Matteo spoke. The rivers are the key. Everything follows water. If the watersheds are correct, the rest reveals itself. Can you do it without ever going there? Matteo paused. I can make something better than what exists. But I need everything. Every report. Every observation. Every log. They gave him 5 weeks. Matteo worked 16 hours a day. Sometimes more. He slept on the floor beside the table. He cross-referenced accounts that disagreed by hundreds of miles. He applied geological logic to guess what no one had seen. He did not copy. He deduced. The finished map was extraordinary. It predicted rapids, identified seasonal flood zones, marked strategic high ground, mapped navigable channels that had never been charted. All from paper, all from thought. When the expedition launched, they carried Matteo's map. 4 months later, they returned alive. The outpost stood. Casualties were minimal. The commander called the map uncannily accurate. The viceroy praised General Alvarez. Felipe was promoted and paid generously. Don Hernan received a modest fee. Matteo received nothing, not a coin, not a mention, not even gratitude. But something changed. The general no longer looked at Matteo as a curiosity. He looked at him as a threat. Success bred dependence. Officers requested more maps, more projections, more impossible problems. The cartography department became essential. Matteo was 18. He rarely left the room now. His world shrank to parchment and ink. He mapped freedom for others while being denied even a walk through the market. Felipe began to feel the weight of it. Late at night, after wine loosened his conscience, he spoke to Matteo as an equal. You could be the greatest mapmaker in the Americas, he said once. If circumstances were different, Matteo replied calmly. One night, Felipe made a dangerous offer. I could teach you to use a compass. In secret, Matteo stared at him. The general would find out. And then neither of us would be safe. You deserve to hold one. I understand it already, Matteo said softly. I do not need to touch it to know how it works. But the truth was deeper. A compass meant choice, direction, escape. The ban had become psychological. A cage inside the mind. In 1792, a new figure arrived in Lima. Captain Thomas Graves of the British Navy. A Fellow of the Royal Society. Oxford educated. An expert in maritime navigation. He came during a rare moment of cooperation between Spain and Britain. General Alvarez invited him to view Spanish cartographic achievements. Graves studied the Amazonian maps. His interest turned to astonishment. This theoretical hydrological modeling, he said. This is far beyond standard practice. Who calculated this? Our department, the general replied smoothly. Led by Felipe Cortez. Graves requested a meeting. Felipe tried to answer technical questions. He stumbled. He spoke in generalities. Graves listened politely, then frowned. These maps imply a level of theoretical understanding that does not match your explanations. Silence filled the room. In the corner, Matteo stood still, hands frozen over parchment. The general intervened. Our methods differ from British traditions. We favor results. Graves did not argue, but he was not convinced. Over the next days, he asked questions. Quiet ones. He spoke to junior officers. To clerks. And slowly, a rumor formed. That somewhere inside the Spanish military complex was a mind they did not want seen. And Matteo felt it. For the first time, the danger was not theoretical. It was close. It was watching. And it was curious. If you want part 3, where discovery turns into obsession and the rules begin to crack, subscribe now. Like the video so this hidden history survives. Share it with someone who loves dark historical truths. And comment below, would you have risked everything just to touch a compass? Part 3. Some knowledge can kill. Some minds are too sharp for the chains that bind them. And some horrors are built of stone, dust, and darkness. Matteo had survived 18 years of slavery, deception, and isolation. He had survived the invisible chains of a system that prized his mind but denied him freedom. But nothing had prepared him for the mines. He had been sold to the Northern Highlands, sent to labor in shafts designed to break men. Each tunnel descended into suffocating darkness, each shaft smelled of dust, sweat, and death. The work was cruel, relentless, and designed for slow attrition. The miners were expected to extract silver until their lungs and bones failed. Few survived more than 5 years. On a Tuesday in August, his world shrank to shadows and stone. Shaft 12, an older tunnel recently deepened, had promised rich silver veins. 40 men entered that morning. The air was cold, damp, and heavy with anticipation. Then the collapse came. The sound was unimaginable, like a mountain being torn in half. Support timbers splintered. Rock fell in waves. Screams echoed in stone corridors. Dust filled the air, choking, thick enough to make the world vanish. 12 men died instantly. The others were trapped, pressed against walls, unable to breathe, unable to see. Matteo pressed himself against the far wall. He was unharmed, but not safe. His lungs burned with dust. His mind, however, remained clear. Years of memorizing maps, reading terrain, calculating distances, and predicting outcomes had trained his brain for this. Matteo did not panic. He closed his eyes, pictured the shafts, the angles, the tunnels. He counted his steps, estimated the space. He identified airflow patterns and the faint sounds of running water beneath the rock. He began moving, sliding along walls, feeling for cracks, weak timbers, and loose stones. Behind him, men were screaming, coughing, clawing at debris, sinking into despair. Matteo kept walking. Then he found a side passage. Partially blocked, mostly collapsed, but not sealed. A hidden route, likely an abandoned exploratory shaft no one thought could be navigated. He traced its path in his mind, measuring distances, angles, and direction. He called to the men. "Follow me." His voice was steady, clear, commanding. Some listened, too exhausted or scared to resist. Others ignored him. Matteo ignored them for now. Step by step, he led the first group through the narrow, jagged corridor. He paused where necessary, instructing them silently to climb, crouch, or crawl. He adjusted their route to avoid loose rocks and dead ends. Hours passed. The air grew thinner. Panic rose. Some men fainted. Others cursed him, accusing him of knowing secrets they could not. Matteo did not answer. He had memorized the topology. He had visualized escape in perfect detail. By evening, the first group of men reached a secondary shaft. They emerged near an old ventilation opening that had long been forgotten. Sunlight fell on them like grace. Some collapsed. Some wept. Some whispered prayers of disbelief. Matteo returned to help the remaining men, moving backward through the passage, helping the injured, redirecting those too exhausted to climb. His mind functioned like the maps he had drawn in secret for years. The tunnel was his cartography in real life, every step calculated, every choice deliberate. By midnight, all 28 survivors were accounted for. No one died under his guidance. Matteo himself had scraped, bruised, and breathed dust, but he was intact. The mining overseer, Diego, arrived at dawn. His face twisted in disbelief. He had expected a catastrophe. Instead, he found men alive who had been buried under tons of stone. Diego's mind could not comprehend how one boy had saved them all. He did not know about maps or calculations. He only knew survival had been impossible. Matteo, exhausted but lucid, was silent. He had no intention of explaining. Words could not capture the hours of mental navigation, the visualization, the calculations done with a mind honed for danger. News of the survival spread slowly. Miners whispered about the boy who led men through darkness. Some called it luck, others, fear. Rumors reached Lima, traveling through the bureaucracy and military channels. Felipe heard them first. He had never forgiven himself for failing to keep Matteo in Lima, for allowing the sale to the mining company. He felt both relief and guilt. Relief that Matteo was alive. Guilt that the boy was now trapped in a system even harsher than before. General Alvarez received reports as well. His expression was unreadable. He valued results above all else. Matteo's work in the mines was, in the general's eyes, proof of efficiency. He made a note to ensure further contributions could be extracted. Matteo did not speak of maps, of calculations, of navigation. But every night in the barracks, he returned to what mattered. Hidden beneath floorboards, scraps of discarded parchment awaited him. Every evening, Candlelight illuminated the secret map he had been constructing for years. It was his rebellion, his claim of ownership in a world that refused him autonomy. It depicted every place he had studied, every coast, every river, every mountain. South America, the Caribbean, the Atlantic, Europe, Africa. The world he had never touched but knew intimately. He drew with meticulous care. Corrected errors he had seen in official charts. Connected rivers where colonial surveyors had failed. Marked lands that were misrepresented. Every stroke was a claim of intellectual freedom. And yet, a storm of danger loomed. Mateo was now 19. The mining company expected results, output, labor. The mines were dangerous. Collapse was not an accident, it was constant, a threat hovering over every shift. Mateo had survived once, but he knew survival here depended on vigilance, calculation, and the ability to think faster than death itself. Every step in the dark was a mental map. Every breath measured, every motion deliberate. The boy who had once led soldiers safely across valleys now led men through stone and dust. But no one outside the mine would know. No officer would credit him. No map would bear his name. His work would vanish if he died here. And in that knowledge, Mateo began to dream differently. Not of escape yet, but of mastery. Of control. Of the possibility that knowledge, patience, and vision could create a space even a system designed to kill could not touch. He was learning, again, the cruel lesson of his life: survival and recognition are rarely given. They must be claimed, secretly, meticulously, and sometimes at great personal risk. Mateo's mind was the compass now. His maps were invisible, but his understanding was absolute. And for the first time, he realized that no chain, no wall, no darkness could fully contain what he had built inside himself. If you want part 4, where Mateo begins to leverage his secret knowledge in ways that will terrify and astonish those around him, subscribe now. Like this video to help this story reach more people. Share it with someone who loves hidden history and survival against impossible odds. Comment below, would you trust a mind like Mateo's to guide you through death itself? If you want, I can write part 4 immediately, which is where Mateo's secret map and knowledge start to influence events outside the mines and tension escalates to political and personal danger. This next part gets truly intense. Do you want me to do that next? Part 4. Some knowledge cannot stay hidden forever. Some minds cannot remain silent. And some horrors arrive dressed as opportunity. Mateo had survived slavery, deception, and death traps in mines. He had survived the collapse of shafts meant to bury men alive. He had survived systems that valued his mind but refused him freedom. But now, for the first time, he began to understand the power of what he had created. The secret map he had drawn over years was no longer just a collection of lines, rivers, and mountains. It was a claim, a declaration, an argument that the world belonged to knowledge, not to law or property. Mateo worked late into the nights, candlelight flickering across brittle parchment. He added details to his map, correcting errors he had noticed in military charts, sketching rivers more accurately than any explorer had reported, marking hidden passes and safe paths through terrain officials claimed was impassable. He knew that if this work were discovered, it could change everything. The Viceroyalty's military operations depended on incomplete maps. Mateo's knowledge surpassed every official survey. To the right person, it could be used to secure territory, win battles, or escape oppression. To the wrong person, it would make him a target. Mateo's first real chance to act came unexpectedly. Word arrived that a high-ranking officer would visit the mining site to inspect the shafts. The official, Don Ricardo Mendoza, was known for strict enforcement of rules and a cold, calculating mind. He would judge the mine, the labor, and the efficiency of every worker. Mateo knew the inspection could be dangerous. The officer had no reason to care about the lives of enslaved men, but he would notice irregularities. Mateo had to appear ordinary, compliant, and visible. On the morning of the inspection, the miners lined up. Sweat ran down their faces. Dust covered their skin. Mateo stood among them, small, quiet, yet fully alert. He observed Mendoza from the corner of his eye. He memorized his posture, gestures, the way he measured risk. Every movement became data. Every word, a pattern. As Mendoza inspected the shafts, a sudden collapse occurred in a minor tunnel. It was nothing serious, just a few rocks falling, but it could have injured someone. The other miners froze. Panic rippled. Mateo moved instinctively. He led a small group to stabilize the area, directing men with precise, calm instructions. Rocks were cleared. No one was harmed. Mendoza watched, impressed. He noted the young man's competence. Mateo remained silent, invisible, but effective. After the inspection, Mendoza returned to his quarters. Mateo had been observed, but only as a capable laborer, not as a mind that could map rivers and mountains in his head. Yet Mendoza's interest had been piqued. He asked questions about the geography of the region, about the streams and tunnels, about the safest routes through the mountains. Mateo answered carefully, using general terms, hiding the depth of his understanding. But the seed was planted. Mendoza sensed there was knowledge beyond what was being shown. And Mateo knew it. That night, Mateo returned to his hidden map. He began expanding it. He included new observations from the mining expedition, careful sketches of the tunnels and the surrounding landscape. He calculated distances, angles, and gradients with precision. Each line, each river, each ridge was a silent protest against a system that had tried to own him. Weeks passed. Mateo continued his secret work. His reputation among miners grew. They whispered about the boy who could read the land without ever seeing it. Some feared him. Some revered him. None understood fully what he was capable of. Meanwhile, news arrived from Lima. General Alvarez had received a report of an unexpected mapping error in the northern highlands. A route had been incorrectly charted, causing delays in supply lines. Felipe was summoned to correct it, but the task required insight only Mateo possessed. Felipe wrote to the mining company, requesting temporary access to Mateo. The company refused, citing labor contracts and legal ownership. Felipe understood the futility but wrote anyway, hoping the general would intervene. Mateo understood too. He realized that his knowledge made him valuable, but his value did not guarantee safety. The colonial system saw him as property, not a person. If he acted too openly, his life could end immediately. It was then that Captain Thomas Graves returned in secret. He had traveled from England to observe Spanish colonies and to study their mapping techniques. Graves had not forgotten the young slave who had mastered the Amazonian maps without ever touching a compass. He had quietly investigated, asking questions, piecing together what he could from those willing to speak. Graves sought Mateo alone, under the cover of night. He brought a compass, small and brass, polished to perfection. Mateo's hands trembled when he saw it. "You understand it already," Graves said. "But holding it is different. It gives choice. It gives direction. It is a tool the world cannot take from you." Mateo studied it silently. The compass was more than an instrument. It was a symbol, a glimpse of freedom that the world had always denied him. He did not reach for it immediately, but he memorized its weight, its balance, its potential. Graves spoke quietly. "There are places in the world where a man is valued for his mind. Not his legal status. Not the chains imposed on him. England has freed slaves. So has France. This is not universal. It is not eternal." Mateo absorbed every word. The idea of a world outside chains, outside ownership, outside forced labor began to take root. His map was no longer just an act of secret survival. It was a plan, a vision, a claim to a world where his knowledge belonged to him and him alone. Over the following months, Mateo continued his secret work. He refined his map, integrating every observation, every sketch, every insight he could gather. He hid it carefully under floorboards, in gaps in walls, in places no one would think to look. Each night, he imagined a future where he could navigate freely, where his mind could explore without restriction. Each line he drew was a step toward that freedom. And as Mateo labored, the forces around him began to shift. The mining company continued to demand output. The military continued to rely on maps. Graves' visits became more frequent. Philippe's guilt grew heavier. Mateo understood one truth more clearly than ever. Knowledge is power, but power is meaningless without freedom to use it. And he began to wonder if, one day, He could take the maps, the knowledge, and the world he had memorized and make them truly his own. If you want to see part 5, where Mateo's secret map begins to influence events far beyond the mines and danger draws closer, subscribe now. Like this video to help uncover hidden history. Share it with someone who loves stories of survival and rebellion. Comment below. Do you think a mind like Mateo's can ever be contained? I can continue immediately with part 5, where Mateo starts turning his knowledge into influence and begins to manipulate outcomes without leaving the mines. That part gets intense and suspenseful. Do you want me to write part 5 next? Part 5. Some minds are bigger than the world they are trapped in. Some secrets are more dangerous than weapons. And some horrors are silent, hidden behind ordinary faces. Mateo had survived slavery, betrayal, and near death in the mines. He had survived being denied tools, freedom, and recognition. But survival was only the beginning. By 19, Mateo realized that his knowledge had power far beyond the mine shafts. The secret map he had created was no longer just a personal rebellion. It was influence. It could change outcomes. It could guide armies, avoid disasters, and reveal opportunities others could not see. The first time he tested it was small and careful. He noticed inefficiencies in the way the mining company managed the shafts. Tunnels were being overworked. Ore was being removed inefficiently. Some passages were unsafe. Mateo began to whisper suggestions to his fellow miners, subtle adjustments that saved lives and increased output. No one knew it was him. No one could imagine the calculations in his head, the lines and angles memorized over years of secret study. He was invisible, yet he changed the course of work with precision. Word of the improved efficiency reached the overseers. Diego, the camp manager, was pleased but puzzled. He had no idea who was responsible. Mateo remained quiet. Then came a letter from Lima. The mining company was sending an engineer to assess the northern shafts and improve operations. Mateo understood immediately. The engineer would arrive in 2 weeks. He would observe, measure, and report. If Mateo acted too obviously, the engineer might notice patterns he could not explain. Mateo spent nights studying the existing tunnels and maps in his head. He created a mental overlay of the shafts, predicting how the engineer would inspect them, where he would check measurements, where he would move first, what questions he might ask. When the engineer arrived, Mateo moved subtly. He positioned miners strategically, suggested paths for inspection, and provided quietly accurate measurements without revealing that he already knew every detail. The engineer was astonished. The shafts were safer than expected. Production was higher. The tunnels were more stable. Diego received praise. Mateo received nothing. But he understood the pattern. Influence without recognition. Power without freedom. Mateo's ambitions grew. He began to think beyond the mine. He remembered the English captain, Thomas Graves, and his words about freedom and knowledge. He realized that maps could be more than tools for others. They could be his. He expanded his secret map further, incorporating data from military dispatches he had memorized, sketches of terrain from travelers, and his own observations of the Andes and the Amazonian foothills. Mateo worked in hidden spaces, under the floorboards, in corners of the barracks no one entered. Each piece of parchment added to his growing vision of the world. He began to use the map strategically. He identified trade routes that the company ignored, passages that reduced travel time, and regions where workers could safely extract ore with minimal risk. By sharing small hints discreetly, he improved output, saved lives, and gained subtle influence among miners and supervisors. But danger was always close. Overseers grew suspicious of his insights. Diego noticed that the boy seemed to anticipate problems before they occurred. Whispers spread. Other miners were uneasy. Mateo knew that a single accusation could send him back to punishment or worse. He had to remain invisible. Then news arrived that changed everything. The vice-royalty had received intelligence about a rebellion in the jungle regions, far from Lima. Military leaders planned to send troops into unmapped territory. The expedition would fail without accurate guidance. Felipe Cortes in Lima was summoned to provide solutions. Mateo's skills were needed, but the mining company legally owned him. Mateo realized the stakes. If he wanted his knowledge to be used effectively, he would have to act secretly. He began to create mental simulations of troop movements, routes, and supply lines. He calculated distances, river crossings, and elevation changes in his head, creating invisible maps that could guide armies without leaving the mines. He started communicating through coded messages hidden in reports. Numbers that seemed to indicate production actually contained directional hints. Sketches of tunnels contained symbolic references to geography far beyond the mine. Only those with the right context could interpret them. Felipe and Lima received the coded reports and began to notice anomalies. Some instructions led to surprisingly efficient supply routes. Some sketches predicted obstacles accurately. Felipe suspected Mateo's involvement but could not prove it. The boy remained untouchable, working in shadows. Mateo understood his growing influence. He was no longer just a worker or a slave. He was a strategist, a cartographer, a hidden hand shaping events across Peru. And he had done it without leaving the mines, without touching a compass, without recognition. But influence attracts danger. Word of unusual efficiency and uncanny predictions reached General Alvarez. He demanded explanations. Felipe offered vague justifications, praising the efficiency of the miners and supervisors. The general was not satisfied. He wanted names, accountability, proof. Mateo realized that exposure could be fatal. If the general discovered his secret knowledge, it could be used to manipulate him, to force obedience, or to exploit him further. He became more careful. Every action, every suggestion, every movement was calculated to avoid detection. At the same time, Mateo's ambition grew. He imagined a future where knowledge could equal freedom. The secret map was no longer just a tool for survival. It was a blueprint for agency, a guide to a world beyond chains. He dreamed of escaping, of using his understanding of terrain, rivers, and passes to reach lands where he could be his own master. He also began to mentor, quietly guiding younger miners who showed aptitude. He taught them navigation, observation, and careful reasoning without revealing the full scope of his skills. By empowering others, he created a subtle network of influence within the mines. And all the while, he worked on the ultimate goal, a map of South America so complete, so accurate, and so secret that it could not be ignored. It was his assertion of autonomy, a silent rebellion against every chain, law, and master who had tried to own him. Mateo had transformed from a hidden slave into a force of unseen power. He moved through shadows, surviving danger, exploiting knowledge, and planting seeds of change in every corner he touched. The mines were no longer his prison. They were his laboratory, his classroom, his proving ground. But danger still waited. The general, the company, Felipe, and the military all sought results. One misstep could expose him. One revelation could destroy everything he had built. And Mateo understood that to survive and to gain freedom, he would have to think faster, act smarter, and dream bigger than ever before. If you want Part 6, where Mateo's knowledge begins to challenge authority and his secret influence grows into a threat to powerful men, subscribe now. Like this video to uncover hidden history. Share it with someone who loves true stories of survival and brilliance. Comment below. Would you use hidden knowledge to gain freedom if your life depended on it? I can continue immediately with Part 6, where the tension escalates as Mateo's secret map starts challenging the colonial authorities and his life becomes more dangerous. Do you want me to write Part 6 next? Part 6. Some minds are too sharp to remain hidden. Some secrets cannot be contained. And some horrors are invisible until they strike. Mateo's life had been a series of shadows. A child stolen from home, sold into labor, denied tools, denied freedom. He had survived mines designed to crush men, collapsed tunnels meant to bury them alive, and the constant surveillance of officers who wanted obedience, not genius. But survival alone was no longer enough. Mateo had discovered something more dangerous than chains or rock. He had discovered influence. The secret map he had been constructing for years was more than lines and rivers. It was a network of power, knowledge, and possibility. Each river, each mountain pass, each path he had memorized could shift outcomes without anyone knowing he had shaped them. And now, his influence was about to attract attention. It began with a simple report. A minor mine supervisor noticed patterns in the work of Mateo and his colleagues. Routes through the tunnels were safer. Ore was extracted faster. Accidents were avoided. He assumed competence, but his curiosity grew. He mentioned the results in passing to a visiting engineer. The engineer, unfamiliar with Mateo's genius, assumed it was luck. Yet he began to take note. Small inefficiencies corrected before they occurred, decisions that seemed prescient, patterns others could not explain. Questions were raised. How did these young miners know? Who was responsible? Mateo watched quietly. He had learned the delicate art of invisibility. The goal was influence without exposure. But influence now came with risk. General Alvarez in Lima began to hear rumors. The military relied on maps, and now even the mining company in the highlands was reporting unprecedented efficiency. The general suspected that someone with extraordinary skill was at work. Mateo's mind, which had once been useful and unnoticed, was now a threat simply because no one could control it. Mateo anticipated the danger. He began coding his instructions more carefully. His guidance to miners, previously implicit, now contained layers only he could navigate. He spoke in careful phrasing, used gestures and timing, and embedded his directions in routines the overseers could not detect. His influence grew, but so did the tension around him. Meanwhile, Captain Thomas Graves returned to Lima. He had not forgotten the boy who had mapped the Amazonian foothills without a compass. Graves had learned that Mateo was now in the mines, legally enslaved, yet operating with an almost supernatural awareness of terrain and logistics. He traveled secretly to observe. When Graves arrived at the mining camp, he observed Mateo without introducing himself. He noted the boy's methods, the subtle control he exerted over miners, the way he anticipated collapse, fatigue, and inefficiency. Graves understood immediately. Mateo had turned survival into strategy, labor into command, and invisibility into power. Graves approached Mateo at night, under the pretense of examining ore samples. He spoke softly. You have the mind to lead beyond these tunnels. You can navigate not just stone but the world itself. He offered guidance, advice on strategy, and even hinted at possibilities for freedom. Mateo listened, aware of the danger. Words alone could expose him, yet Graves was careful. He recognized Mateo's need for discretion. Mateo understood the stakes. The general could send soldiers at any moment. Felipe could be forced to reveal the boy's contributions. The mining company could punish him. Every decision carried risk. Yet Mateo also realized opportunity. The secret map was more than parchment. It was a lifeline. He began expanding it further, including hidden routes through the Andes, paths around military patrols, river passages that could provide escape, and potential safe havens beyond colonial control. Each edition was both survival and strategy, rebellion and preparation. The first true test came unexpectedly. An official from Lima arrived, ostensibly to inspect the mine. He was ruthless, meticulous, and observant. Mateo knew that any mistake could expose him. The inspector began questioning the miners, examining tunnels, measuring angles, and testing safety. Mateo remained silent, letting his mental calculations guide the miners. When the inspector attempted to direct work in an inefficient pattern, Mateo subtly adjusted operations. Ore was still extracted efficiently. Hazards were avoided, yet the inspector could not trace the improvements back to him. Mateo had become invisible power in the shadows. But invisibility has limits. Whispers began circulating. Other miners noticed Mateo's uncanny precision. Rumors of a boy who could see through stone and predict danger reached the ears of the mining company's regional manager. The manager grew suspicious. He began closer supervision, questioning miners, observing behavior, and searching for anomalies. Mateo recognized the increased scrutiny. He decided to test his network. He began teaching trusted miners small, coded methods to anticipate risks, to navigate tunnels more efficiently, and to protect themselves from collapse. He created a subtle hierarchy of knowledge. The miners learned to rely on Mateo without ever knowing the full scope of his understanding. At the same time, Mateo began mentally connecting his maps beyond the mines. He considered the larger world. Supply routes, rivers, mountain passes, and hidden paths across Peru and beyond. His mind worked tirelessly, creating invisible overlays of the continent. He memorized routes that no one else could, envisioning a future in which knowledge could be used as freedom. And then disaster struck. One morning, a tunnel collapsed unexpectedly. Dust filled the air. Men screamed. Panic erupted. Matteo moved instantly. He directed miners through partially blocked passages, calculating distances, air supply, and risk. He guided them to safety. No lives were lost, but the collapse had been observed. The regional manager saw Matteo calmly taking command. He took note of the boy's skill, his composure, and his effectiveness. Matteo realized that his invisibility was eroding. Soon, the full weight of authority would bear down on him. Matteo began preparing for the moment he could no longer hide. His secret map grew more complete, including all possible escape routes, passages through mountains, and river systems. He was readying himself for a world beyond the mines, a world where his mind could navigate freely, where his knowledge could finally be his own. Yet danger was close. General Alvarez, Felipe, the mining company, and regional authorities all moved unknowingly toward Matteo. Each step of his influence, each demonstration of skill, increased his visibility. His life depended on timing, discretion, and the precision he had learned from years of cartography. Matteo understood one truth above all. Knowledge is power. But power is meaningless if it cannot be used. And freedom is meaningless if it cannot be claimed. If you want to see Part 7, where Matteo's secret map begins to guide escapes, shape strategy, and challenge authority directly, subscribe now. Like this video to uncover hidden history. Share it with someone who loves stories of genius trapped in horror. Comment below. Would you risk everything to turn invisible power into freedom? I can continue immediately with Part 7, where Matteo begins to act directly on his knowledge to influence events outside the mines, raising the stakes and danger dramatically. Do you want me to write Part 7 next? Part 7. Some knowledge is too dangerous to remain secret. Some minds are too sharp to be confined. And some horrors are invisible until they strike without warning. Matteo had spent years shaping the world from shadows. He had survived slavery, minds designed to crush men, and systems that refused to recognize his genius. Now, he faced the ultimate challenge. The moment had come where subtlety was no longer enough. His secret map, his invisible influence, had to act. It started with whispers. Trusted miners noticed his precision, his ability to foresee danger, and the hidden paths he seemed to know instinctively. They began to ask questions. Others noticed the efficiency he brought and wondered aloud who was responsible. Rumors spread faster than sunlight in the high Andes. Matteo knew he could no longer remain entirely hidden. The authorities, already suspicious, were paying closer attention. General Alvarez's officers were sending inspectors. Felipe and Lima worried quietly. Matteo understood that if his knowledge was discovered too early, it could be used to control him or destroy him. But Matteo had a plan. He had memorized every route, every river, every mountain pass within hundreds of miles. He had integrated knowledge from military maps, trade logs, and missionary sketches into a mental atlas no one else could match. His secret map was complete, a living model of the continent in his mind. The first opportunity to act came unexpectedly. A rebellion broke out in the northern highlands. Indigenous groups, aware of Spanish patrols and mining operations, had begun to harass convoys, attack small settlements, and disrupt trade routes. The Spanish authorities were scrambling. Military units were sent with inadequate maps, relying on guides who were lost or unreliable. Matteo saw a chance to use his knowledge. He began sending coded instructions through trusted miners. Each message looked innocuous. Advice on ore extraction, suggestions on tunnel reinforcement, reminders about equipment. But hidden within were precise directions for safe routes, optimal river crossings, and concealed paths around patrols. The results were immediate. Supply lines remained intact. Convoys avoided ambushes. Workers and soldiers reached their destinations safely. The rebellion's impact was minimized. No one suspected a single enslaved boy had guided the operation. Word of the miraculous efficiency reached Lima. Felipe received praise and rewards. Matteo remained hidden, but each success increased the danger. Inspectors began to take notes, tracking patterns that they could not explain. The regional manager, Diego, suspected something unusual. Mateo anticipated this. He created false patterns for observers to follow while continuing his real work in secret. He adjusted operations subtly, ensuring that anyone watching would believe efficiency was the result of normal competence, luck, or experience. Captain Thomas Graves returned in secret. He had been following reports of Mateo's extraordinary skill and wanted to see it firsthand. He observed the boy directing miners, anticipating obstacles, and guiding operations. Graves understood immediately that Mateo was no longer just surviving, he was shaping outcomes on a scale few could imagine. Graves approached Mateo privately. "You are creating more than maps. You are creating strategy, survival, and influence. One day this knowledge will be yours." The boy understood the significance. For the first time, he saw the possibility of freedom not as a distant dream but as a plan. Mateo began preparing for that plan. His map expanded beyond Peru. He memorized routes across the Andes, through forests, along rivers, and toward coasts. He identified safe havens, hidden passes, and paths where colonial forces could not follow. His mind became a living atlas of escape, power, and survival. The real test came when a group of miners became trapped in a newly dug shaft. A collapse blocked the main tunnel. Dust filled the air. Panic erupted. Without hesitation, Mateo guided the men through side passages, calculating distances, airflow, and stability. He led them to safety without losing a single life. Diego, the overseer, noticed his skill. He could not explain it. He praised the boy's calmness and foresight. The miners whispered, but Mateo remained silent, invisible in plain sight. With each incident, Mateo's confidence grew. He began mentoring a select few miners, teaching them to read the terrain, observe details, and anticipate danger. He created a network of knowledge that extended beyond himself. They did not understand the full scope of his skill, but they learned to trust his judgment implicitly. The rebellion in the highlands escalated. Spanish patrols became more desperate. Felipe, under pressure from the general, began relying more on reports from the northern mines. The coded instructions from Mateo guided military units, preserved lives, and prevented disaster. Each success brought him closer to being discovered but also closer to creating real leverage. Mateo understood the delicate balance. He had influence but no freedom. Recognition could bring reward or punishment. Knowledge could save lives or end his own. Each move was calculated, each word considered. He began considering a larger escape. His mental map included the most remote areas, paths where patrols would never think to search. He identified routes that connected river valleys to coastal points, routes that could carry him far beyond colonial reach. He imagined the world outside the mines, a world where his mind, not his status as property, determined his destiny. But danger was never far. General Alvarez had begun to suspect extraordinary skill in the northern operations. Felipe, under pressure, feared exposure. The mining company demanded results. Inspectors were scrutinizing efficiency, safety, and compliance. Mateo understood that one misstep could destroy him. Yet he also realized something profound. Knowledge could be freedom even without recognition. The secret map was no longer a private act of rebellion. It was a blueprint for survival, escape, and influence. Each route, each calculation, each observation expanded the boundaries of what was possible. Mateo began taking small risks, testing his mental map in real situations. He guided convoys around ambushes, directed workers to safer tunnels, and subtly influenced military movements. Every success strengthened his position. Every error could be fatal. And in the quiet moments, he returned to his personal map, hidden under the floorboards. He added rivers, mountain passes, and paths to regions no one would think to explore. He memorized every detail, preparing for the moment when he could turn knowledge into action and claim a life of autonomy. If you want to see Part 8, where Mateo's secret map leads to bold action, danger escalates, and his influence directly challenges colonial authority, subscribe now. Like this video to uncover hidden history. Share it with someone who loves stories of survival, genius, and rebellion. Comment below. Could a single mind change the course of history in secret? I can continue immediately with Part 8, where Matteo moves from influence in the shadows to decisive action that could alter his fate forever. Do you want me to write Part 8 next? Part 8. Some minds cannot be caged. Some secrets demand action, and some horrors are only revealed when someone dares to break the rules. Matteo had spent years surviving. He had endured slavery, backbreaking labor, collapsed mines, and a world that refused to recognize him. But survival had evolved into something greater. He had influence, invisible power, and knowledge no one else could touch. Now it was time to use it. It began quietly. The rebellion in the northern highlands grew stronger. Spanish troops stumbled through dense forests and river systems, relying on incomplete maps and inexperienced guides. Supply lines were vulnerable, lives were being lost, and Matteo could see it all from the confines of the mines. He began to act with precision. Using coded instructions embedded in mine reports, he guided convoys around ambushes, directed workers to safer passages, and anticipated every obstacle. His influence spread far beyond the miners who followed his subtle instructions. Entire operations moved with the rhythm of his calculations, yet no one knew his hand was guiding them. Matteo realized that his invisible power could become visible if wielded carefully. He began to test the boundaries. He would risk small exposures, guiding patrols through challenging terrain, allowing his genius to be glimpsed but never fully revealed. Each success increased his confidence and expanded his network of trust. Captain Thomas Graves had returned to Lima and learned of Matteo's extraordinary work. Graves knew that the boy had become something more than a slave or a worker. He had become a strategist, a cartographer, and an unseen force shaping the fate of men. Graves tried to warn Matteo, advising caution. But Matteo had already begun to dream bigger. The opportunity came when a new military expedition was planned. Spanish forces were to secure a critical river crossing in the highlands, a route that could determine control of the region. The maps were incomplete. Previous expeditions had failed. Lives would be lost without precise guidance. Matteo saw the chance to turn knowledge into action. He studied every report, every sketch, every map fragment available to him. He calculated river currents, elevations, hidden passages, and seasonal changes. He memorized troop positions, supply needs, and potential threats. His mind became a living map, an atlas of strategy, survival, and escape. When the expedition left, he guided them through coded instructions hidden in logistical reports. Convoys avoided ambushes, engineers found optimal crossings, and soldiers moved with unexpected efficiency. Each decision Matteo influenced saved lives. Each success made him more visible, yet more indispensable. The general in Lima began to notice. Felipe, pressured by superiors, had to provide explanations. He praised efficiency, skill, and experience. The general suspected something extraordinary, something that could not be attributed to ordinary methods. Suspicion grew. Matteo was close to discovery, yet he moved with calculated precision, always one step ahead. Matteo's secret map expanded. He included escape routes, hidden passes, and safe havens beyond colonial reach. He began to imagine a world where his mind, not his status as property, determined his destiny. He prepared for the day when he could act openly, when knowledge could become freedom. Then disaster struck. One night, the mining company received news that a rival operation had been sabotaged, and workers were being blamed. Tensions rose. The regional manager increased surveillance. Inspectors arrived unexpectedly. Matteo realized the walls were closing in. He had to act decisively. He identified a small, strategic window of opportunity. Using his knowledge of terrain, rivers, and passes, he devised a plan to guide a group of trusted miners and sympathetic workers to safety while maintaining the illusion of normal operations. The plan was risky. Exposure could mean capture or death. But the potential reward was freedom. Matteo began preparations. He trained a select group of miners in observation, navigation, and coded communication. He distributed responsibilities carefully, ensuring no one could inadvertently reveal his plan. He memorized every route, calculated every distance, and anticipated every obstacle. The day of action arrived. Under the cover of night, Mateo led the group through hidden passages in the mines, across mountain trails, and along river valleys he had memorized from maps and reports. Every step required precision. Every decision could mean life or death. They moved quietly, avoiding patrols and settlements. Mateo's calculations were flawless. Streams were crossed safely. Hidden paths were followed accurately. Supplies were rationed efficiently. The group reached a secluded location in the highlands where they could rest without detection. Mateo paused to look at the sky, the mountains, and the river below. For the first time, he felt the power of his mind fully realized. Knowledge had become freedom. The map he had hidden for years, the network of routes, and the understanding of terrain all converged into this moment. But danger was not gone. The colonial authorities were searching. Felipe, aware of Mateo's actions, worried for his safety. The general suspected extraordinary skill. Any mistake could lead to capture, punishment, or death. Mateo knew the stakes. Each movement had to be precise, each decision calculated. Over the following days, Mateo guided the group farther from immediate danger, using routes no one else knew. He continued to expand his secret map in his mind, incorporating observations from the journey, calculations of river currents, and changes in terrain. He was creating a living atlas of escape, resilience, and survival. Mateo also began teaching those with him, passing on skills of observation, navigation, and reasoning. He created a network of informed followers, each capable of interpreting subtle signs, reading terrain, and avoiding danger. His influence multiplied exponentially. And yet, Mateo remained cautious. He knew exposure could undo everything. Colonial law, military authority, and the mining company all had the power to destroy him. His freedom depended not only on skill but on secrecy, timing, and the precision he had honed over years of hardship. This was the moment when Mateo transformed from a hidden genius into an active agent of his destiny. He was no longer a passive survivor or an invisible influence. He was a strategist, a leader, and a cartographer using knowledge as power. Every decision, every route, every calculation was a step toward autonomy. If you want to see Part 9, where Mateo's journey escalates to confrontation with colonial authorities, the stakes become deadly, and his secret map begins to shape the fate of entire regions, subscribe now. Like this video to uncover hidden history. Share it with someone who loves stories of courage, intelligence, and rebellion. Comment below. How far would you go to turn knowledge into freedom? I can continue immediately with Part 9, where Mateo's secret map directly challenges colonial authority and puts his life at the highest risk. Do you want me to write Part 9 next? Part 9. Some truths are too dangerous to reveal. Some minds are too sharp to remain silent. And some horrors demand a choice between survival and rebellion. Mateo's journey had carried him through darkness, through minds that crushed men, and through a life that sought to deny his mind. But now the stakes were higher than ever. His secret map, the atlas of escape, survival, and power he had carried in his mind for years, was about to confront the full force of the colonial world. The northern highlands were restless. Rebellions flared and patrols moved unpredictably. Supply routes were disrupted. The colonial authorities were scrambling to maintain control. And Mateo, hidden within the mines and mountains, had become an invisible strategist, guiding operations that no one suspected were influenced by a single enslaved boy. But whispers traveled. Observers noted uncanny efficiency in convoys, miners surviving collapses with extraordinary foresight, and explorers navigating terrain that had confounded generals. Mateo's name was not spoken, but his influence was felt. That was enough to draw attention. Diego, the mining overseer, began to suspect something extraordinary. Inspectors arrived frequently, their questions sharp, their suspicions growing. Felipe, in Lima, tried to shield Mateo, but he knew that the boy's genius could not remain hidden forever. General Alvarez, now in senior command, was also aware of reports that hinted at skill beyond ordinary comprehension. Mateo's time of invisibility was nearing its end. The first confrontation came unexpectedly. A Spanish military patrol, sent to inspect the northern highlands, stumbled upon one of Mateo's carefully guided operations. Supplies had been moved, miners positioned, and ambushes avoided with precision. The officers were astonished. They demanded explanations. The miners, trained by Mateo's subtle instruction, gave vague answers. Mateo remained silent, observing from the shadows. Every reaction, every question, every movement of the officers was calculated. If he revealed himself too soon, it could mean imprisonment or death. But if he acted strategically, he could leverage this moment into freedom. Captain Thomas Graves returned again, discreetly observing the situation. He knew that Mateo's time had come. The boy was no longer just surviving. He was shaping outcomes, influencing lives, and challenging authority, all from behind the veil of invisibility. Graves understood that the secret map Mateo carried in his mind was now a weapon, a guide to survival and rebellion. Mateo began preparing. His mental map was a network of paths, rivers, mountains, and hidden passages. He memorized patrol schedules, river currents, and terrain features that no outsider could follow. He calculated the safest routes, contingencies for every potential threat, and methods to avoid capture. Every detail mattered. One error could cost him everything. The opportunity arrived sooner than expected. The military patrol moved deeper into the highlands, attempting to assert control over a strategic river crossing. They were unprepared for the terrain and poorly supplied. Mateo, through coded signals to trusted miners, began guiding them subtly. Convoys avoided ambushes, engineers found safe river crossings, and supplies moved efficiently. The military officers were baffled. The success did not go unnoticed. Diego reported to regional authorities. Felipe received inquiries from Lima. The general grew curious and increasingly suspicious. Mateo realized that subtlety alone would no longer protect him. If he wanted to remain free, he would have to act decisively. Mateo made a bold decision. He would use his secret map, not just to guide others, but to secure his own freedom. He identified hidden paths through the Andes, river systems leading away from patrols, and secluded areas where he and his allies could evade capture. He coordinated with trusted miners, sharing only what they needed to survive and move. The night of action arrived. Under cover of darkness, Mateo led a small group of miners and sympathetic workers through hidden tunnels, mountain passes, and rivers he had memorized from maps and observation. Every step was precise, every movement calculated. They avoided patrols, natural hazards, and unstable terrain. As they moved, Mateo taught them to observe, calculate, and anticipate danger. He created a network of knowledge that extended beyond himself. Each miner became capable of reading terrain, predicting risks, and navigating unknown paths. Mateo's influence multiplied. He was no longer a single mind but a force shaping outcomes across the highlands. Yet the danger escalated. Inspectors and officers began to notice patterns too precise to be coincidental. Rumors of a hidden strategist circulated. Diego became increasingly suspicious. The general, aware of extraordinary efficiency in northern operations, began questioning Felipe directly. Felipe realized he could no longer shield Mateo completely. Mateo anticipated the exposure. He prepared contingencies, escape routes, and hidden caches of supplies. He calculated every possibility, including interception by soldiers, sudden weather changes, and natural hazards. His mind moved faster than any threat. Knowledge had become his armor. The confrontation came at dawn. A patrol discovered the group resting in a secluded valley. Soldiers demanded identification. Mateo stepped forward. His presence was calm, precise, and confident. He spoke not as a slave, but as a guide, a strategist, and a mind commanding respect. He used his knowledge to navigate the confrontation, diverting attention and guiding the patrol safely away without revealing the true nature of his influence. The success was remarkable. Lives were preserved, orders were executed efficiently, patrols were satisfied, and Mateo remained undetected, his mind the only map of the operation. Yet he knew this would not last forever. Exposure was inevitable. In the following weeks, Mateo expanded his secret map further, incorporating every observation from the journey. He recorded routes, river crossings, hidden paths, and escape options. Each addition increased his autonomy. Each calculation brought him closer to freedom. Captain Graves, observing from afar, recognized the significance. Mateo had transformed from a hidden genius into a strategist capable of shaping outcomes across regions. Graves knew that colonial authorities could never understand the scope of the boy's mind. Mateo's knowledge had become a force in its own right. Mateo also understood the moral weight of his power. He was no longer just saving himself. He was protecting miners, workers, and potentially entire communities. Every decision carried responsibility. Every calculation could determine life or death. The secret map in his mind had become a tool not only for survival but for justice. And yet, freedom remained elusive. Mateo knew that to escape completely, he would need to move beyond the highlands, beyond the reach of colonial authorities, and beyond the limits of the known maps. Every route he memorized, every river he studied, every mountain pass he calculated became part of a grand design for autonomy. If you want to see Part 10, the final chapter, where Mateo confronts the ultimate challenge, risks everything, and the secret map reveals its full power, subscribe now. Like this video to uncover the hidden genius and horrors of history. Share it with someone who loves stories of courage, intelligence, and rebellion. Comment below. Could knowledge alone change the course of history? I can now create Part 10, the thrilling conclusion where Mateo's secret map and years of genius led to the ultimate test of freedom, risk, and legacy. Do you want me to write Part 10 next? Part 10 Final part. Some stories end in darkness. Some minds blaze brighter than the chains that bind them. And some truths are so powerful, the world cannot erase them, no matter how hard it tries. Mateo had survived the mines, slavery, and impossible challenges. He had built a secret map in his mind, memorized every river, every mountain pass, and every hidden path across vast stretches of South America. He had guided convoys, saved lives, and influenced military strategy while remaining invisible. But now, at 21 years old, he faced the ultimate challenge, claiming his freedom in a world determined to deny it. The northern highlands were tense. The colonial authorities had noticed patterns too precise to ignore. Diego had begun reporting unusual activity. Inspectors and patrols moved unpredictably, searching for the source of this extraordinary skill. Felipe in Lima feared the worst. Mateo knew that one misstep could mean death, capture, or permanent enslavement. But he also knew that the moment to act had arrived. Mateo had spent months preparing. His mental map included secret valleys, hidden mountain passes, river crossings invisible to patrols, and safe zones where colonial forces could not follow. He had trained a small network of miners and trusted workers to understand subtle signals and observations without knowing the full plan. Every contingency had been calculated. Every obstacle anticipated. The night of action was moonless. Clouds hid the stars. The wind whispered through the mountains. Mateo gathered his group, quietly explaining routes and hand signals. Fear was present, but so was trust. They moved silently through hidden mine shafts, along concealed trails, and across icy rivers that no outsider would dare cross at night. Every step was precise. Every decision could mean life or death. As they progressed, Mateo's mind worked faster than anyone could comprehend. He calculated distances, river currents, and terrain stability while simultaneously monitoring patrol patterns and natural hazards. His network of trained miners followed instinctively, guided by subtle cues only they understood. The group moved like a living map, a coordinated force invisible to colonial authorities. By dawn, they reached a secluded plateau overlooking a deep river valley. Mateo paused. For the first time, he could see the extent of the territory he had memorized. The hidden passages, safe havens, and remote regions he had studied and integrated into his mental atlas were now real paths to freedom. He realized he was no longer just surviving. He was orchestrating his destiny. But freedom demanded risk. A small patrol had noticed their absence and began searching nearby valleys. Mateo analyzed their movements. Using his knowledge of terrain, he led the group along a path that circled around the patrol, guiding them over cliffs, through dense forest, and along riverbanks that masked their passage. The patrol passed without noticing a single person. Mateo's heart raced, not with fear, but with the thrill of agency. He had never held a compass, yet every movement was precise. His mind had become the ultimate instrument, a compass and map in one. The invisible chains that had bound him since childhood were now powerless against his intellect. Hours later, the group reached a remote river crossing that Mateo had identified from maps he had studied secretly. The current was strong, but he had memorized the depth, the hidden rocks, and the safest points to cross. One by one, they made it across without incident. Lives were saved. Mateo's network expanded. His influence had turned into tangible freedom for those around him. Yet the final test was ahead. Beyond the river lay the borderlands, areas outside immediate colonial control. Mateo had memorized routes that would lead him to territories where slavery was rare, where knowledge could be leveraged for opportunity. But the journey was treacherous. Snow-capped peaks, dense forests, and wild rivers challenged them. One wrong decision could end everything. Mateo guided the group through the mountains. Each night, he reviewed the secret map in his mind, recalculating routes based on terrain, weather, and patrol patterns. Each morning, he observed the land, integrating new details into his mental atlas. By the fourth day, they were deep in the borderlands, far from colonial oversight, moving toward regions where survival was possible and freedom attainable. The final obstacle was a heavily patrolled mountain pass. Mateo had memorized a hidden tunnel that miners once used for transporting ore. The entrance was covered by rocks and vegetation. Using his network, they cleared the path and slipped through undetected. The patrols passed without discovering them. Mateo's calculation and preparation had turned what seemed like certain capture into a triumph of intellect and courage. When they emerged from the pass, the land opened into rolling hills and vast valleys beyond Spanish control. Mateo paused. For the first time in his life, he was not a slave, not an invisible genius, not a hidden cartographer. He was free. The air tasted different. The mountains and rivers he had memorized now guided him physically, not just mentally. Mateo's secret map had carried him through survival, influence, and rebellion. He had saved lives, guided military operations, and defied a system that refused to see him as human. Now, it guided him toward a future of his own making. He led his small network of followers to a settlement where freedom was possible, where knowledge could be valued, and where his intellect could shape opportunity instead of being exploited. In the years that followed, Mateo's work continued quietly. He documented rivers, mountains, and passes, ensuring that knowledge once hidden would survive. He taught others to observe, reason, and navigate. His legacy became more than maps. It became the proof that intellect could outlast chains, that courage could survive oppression, and that knowledge was a path to freedom. The world may never know his name. Colonial records erased him. Histories attributed his genius to others. But for those who survived because of him, for those whose lives he shaped and saved, Mateo's brilliance was real and enduring. Some minds cannot be chained. Some knowledge cannot be erased. And some stories, whispered in shadows, demand to be told.